good thing, was it? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank goodness for that. Sorry. No, I did seriously say I would share the slides because it would make more sense. I'm being a bit more techie than Tim, but I was obviously lying about that. Sorry, Tim. So welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along. We're going to just talk for a little bit about the book, a little bit about what the purpose of the book was, and then we've picked out some things that we thought were particularly interesting that came from the book, but we've designed this PowerPoint to be basically quite open, so there's plenty of space for questions and for comments and for sharing experiences of in-sessional as part of it as well. If I just move on to the first slide, we wanted to start off first of all by talking a little bit, giving you a little bit of background. Thank you very much, Jenny, for saying it's the first book in Sessional. We think it is as well, and that was the main motivation, really. So how it all started was that I was reviewing a book for a journal and for a publisher, and as part of that there was a question at the end of the reviewing document which said, have you got any ideas for a book that you would like to explore? And I thought, well, yes, in Sessional, because it's such a great area to work in and it's such an interesting area of EAP, and it did feel like there isn't really anything published in this area. So that's where it all came about. And our purpose in writing the book is we had quite a lot of conversations about the title, and would it be a handbook? Would it be a guide? Would it be a reflective guide? And in the end, our idea is, because the in-sessional is such a complex area of practice and such where context is so important to what you do and how you develop your in-sessional provision, that it wouldn't be appropriate to try and do a how-to guide. So that's definitely not the purpose of the book. The purpose instead is to encourage reflection on what you do if you're already working in this area, or if you're thinking of setting up for an in-sessional, some new in-sessional provision within a university context, to think about what are the kind of questions that would be helpful for you in terms of how to do that, because it is an area where typically there isn't a great deal of support or kind of any kind of roadmap really of how you should approach this. So that's the idea. It's about reflection. And in terms of how we did this, or how we went about this, the main idea in the book really was to interview people who are doing it. So we interviewed a lot of practitioners in the UK, but also beyond, about what they did and what their approach to the in-sessional was, and we sort of shared the list of our questions as well in the back of the book. But it was a series of conversations with people about what they do in their institutions, rather than a sort of formal interview, a formal kind of research process. So I suppose another overall thing just to say about the purpose in writing the book is that it is really kind of intended as something to get the ball rolling within Sessional. So that's why it's great to be here with the in-sessional SIG, because it's clear that this area of practice is one where there's definitely potential for more exploration. And so we hope that it can be kind of a sort of a starting point for that, really, kind of encourage people to kind of look into things like that. So I'm going to hand over to Tim now, and I will just be excellently handling the slides in the background. So Tim, do you want to go on to talk about the next bit on the slide?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Neil. So I guess this area of interest Neil's introduced to some extent, but we particularly honed in on this idea of it being occluded or partially hidden. And one of the things that comes through in part of the book is the need so often for EAP centres to be entrepreneurial. And very often this might affect the status or the positioning of lecturers or practitioners. And in fact, some centres may be an effective arm of student recruitment. And so, in that context, and I'm not saying it's everyone's context, but in that context, in-sessional work, which is such an important endeavour, can sometimes be sidelined. So we're making the case for it really being important. as a way of developing student autonomy, developing students' academic literary skills within a discipline, you know, and those of you who work in sessional know this very well. Yet, you know, not contributing to the bottom line at the end of the day. It might not even, I mean, it may be resource heavy to do quite well, and yet not prominent and not money making for a centre. So we have something which is often maybe not publicly articulated. And one of the things which we sort of looked at in the book was Ursula Wingate's reference in her own book in 2015, where she and Tribble tried to research publicly available information on university websites about integrated academic literacy development work, i.e. in-sessional type work. And they found very little evidence of what they considered best practice. And a lot of it was either online or quite general. So this occludedness, which is compounded by maybe not having an external examiner, maybe not scrutinized with the same processes that other courses in a university might be, and practitioners sometimes working entirely independently, seem to be something worth making public. And especially because the practice, as we found in our interviews, is so interesting and so valuable, and yet outside of conferences and PIMS and opportunities for sharing SIGs and so on, there might not be actually the possibility for people to share this, even inside one's own institution sometimes. So yeah, the driver of the project was this bringing to light. And we make the argument that in-sessional practitioners are highly dedicated, have highly developed skills, and are doing very often innovative practice in highly situated contexts. Speaking a little bit about our own roles, as Jenny mentioned, Neil is coordinating in-sessional delivery in a very large university for very large numbers of students, embedded in lots of different disciplinary fields. My own context is in a much smaller university. It's in a small centre where everyone sort of does a bit of everything, but there's a very strong sense of interdisciplinarity in my own context. So these contextual differences, I think, were complementary for us as co-writers, but obviously don't provide anything like the full picture. So we wanted to set out and find out what other people were doing to see well beyond our own contexts. So we sought out through our own professional networks and connections and beyond the voices of experience. And really what people explained very often was that they're facing similar practicalities, similar challenges, and they may be having different degrees of success, but having the opportunity to share this success seems essentially a kind of value to the book, in our opinion. Could I have the next slide, please? So I just want to talk through these 3 points before handing back to Neil. These accounts from lecturers, in fact, we conducted 50 interviews, and as Neil mentioned, these are in an enormous variety of contexts. Sometimes a lot of these were from the UK, but also many other countries. And sometimes in-sessional delivery looked like a sort of optional adjunct. Sometimes it was highly embedded. There's really a lot of variation. But what we found is that we never, while there was similarity in what people were talking about, we never got anything like saturation. So every interview produced something new. It wasn't like, what sometimes happens in qualitative research is that you kind of find out and explore everything you need to, and there is a moment where you find nothing new. That simply wasn't the case. Even though people might have been talking about issues of attendance or attrition, where students, begin to leave a course having maybe got too busy or got everything they think they have of value from it. Issues about identifying need, finding where need is, students seeing the need for themselves as well, the challenges of collaboration and cooperation with disciplinary experts, and where there are institutional structures that enable this smoothly or not. The kind of protection of in-sessional delivery where there is staff turnover, either from a disciplinary expert who is sympathetic to your work, or indeed you've developed all this expertise, and if one leaves and gets another job, how does that handover enable a continued practice of high quality in-sessional? So, these things came up time and again in the interviews as kind of topics. These are integral to the in-sessional work. But how people were dealing with these and the kind of stories they could share really came through very strongly. And there was always something new. What we got, if I wanted to generalize from this diversity, we got a picture of great agility and responsiveness on the part of practitioners. The need to be so aware of their students and their context. But always, people shared insight, and hopefully what we've been able to do is highlight this within the book and show it to be relevant, or not, but hopefully relevant to people working in other contexts. So we decided on an approach where these stories became quite prominent, and we let people use their own words at points to talk about their context with comments and discussion from us as well. In terms of what effective practice actually looks like, there isn't an easy answer to this at all. What I would say is our own starting position, and this may be prejudicial, I don't know, and it may be very different from other perspectives in the room, but we started thinking from Ursula Wingate's championing of curriculum integrated and embedded work being highly valued, and that's very similar to the work that Neil does, actually. We're also keen on B. Bond's argument in her book, where she said language work should be more prominent in the curriculums of degree courses, that language and content are not strictly separable in the way they're sometimes seen. So we valued this as a starting point for our own practice over a deficit-informed kind of skills approach, where students might be expected to apply learning to different contexts. However, this isn't necessarily a given, I think. And there are tensions clearly around the degree of embeddedness. And one of the things is where we have highly embedded work, it may simply be that we're training students around achievement of specific tasks, rather than teaching students the tools they need to then encounter and succeed at other different task types. So having it too strongly assessment-based seemed to be an issue. And this is especially true if in-sessionals are front-loaded. And maybe we're kind of training people potentially in how to do well at the first task, and then you're on your own, guys. So that didn't necessarily seem like effective practice. What is clear, though, is agility is not only needed on the part of the practitioner, but also on the part of the student themselves, in working in developing their academic literacy within an in-sessional context.